So Storm of Steel is a war memoir, but it's also at the same time it's not the only one of its kind, right? Because he also wrote what did he write? It was Germ, yeah, it was Germ, it was German Corpse 125, one of which was a fiction based on his diaries, and one was another set of diaries, right? And in these, and in the coming decade, right, in the 1920s, when he got a bit political, he wrote books like The Worker. He would talk about the total mobilization of war, how war became a subordinate to, this process of organizing everything under an ultra-rational, cold and calculated manner, and war became part of this, right? It kind of lost that touch that Junger was looking for at the beginning of the war, especially because Junger, he wanted to have that old school, knights in battle, big chivalry kind of thing. But it's been replaced by methods of killing that became more impersonal, right? Long range weapons. We can thank long range weapons among other things for that, right? And so I think I'd rather just start with that part because I took a lot of notes on it. So there was an essay that I read which kind of synthesized Junger's war experience with total mobilization, and if basically he mentioned how war became almost a bureaucratic endeavor in which it was, like I said, it was very highly administered through technology, and it's only been more so the case, right, with drone strikes. People sitting from their computer chairs doing drone strikes, and basically Junger pointed out how war became under the domain of mobilization, and this is really when the art of war kind of became a science, and if you recall, around chapter 15, which was the other big set of battles, 12 or 15, right? Langmark or the Battle of Cambrai, he finally broke down and started crying because it was very overwhelming for him. And I guess to cut it short, I wonder what you guys had in terms of thoughts on the dehumanization aspect of the war, something that's Junger, although he adapted relatively well to, he never showed signs of post-traumatic stress disorder. It was something that he didn't expect going into the war. The complete dehumanization of the soldier, so that he became more rather just an extension of the machine, right? I wonder if you guys have any thoughts on that, right? Just how he
I don't know. I think the age of heroism when it comes to war is back. I don't think that it's gotten. I think maybe it's gotten worse in certain aspects. But if you want to look at somebody who kind of keeps this heroic nature of war and completely took away, completely stopped the city from getting overrun in Sierra Leone just with one plane. You can look at the story of Neall Ellis. I would kind of agree with the drone strikes and these type of things that war has kind of become a little bit more dehumanized. But I think that in the future, as we see technology grow, and this is like a pretty common theme in a lot of Japanese mecha animes actually, about how as technology grows, like this kind of individual, a lot more ancient chivalric kind of spirit takes on where it used to not be. I mean, I feel like that. I feel like that's the future. I feel like as technology grows, instead of people becoming more dehumanized and more a part of the machine, certain armies will develop themselves to accept more skill-based and technology-based, like heroic aspects of battle instead.
So you're saying that instead of you're saying it's not the case that the uh,
That with technology, society grows
yeah,
more and
yeah.
more. What's that word called? Automatized. I
Yeah,
mean, this
yeah.
can even be looked in World War One. I mean, it. Of course, if you were on the ground fighting in the trenches, it was horrible. But if you were a pilot, it was all skill. It was, they say that that by flying planes, that's like the modern
Mm-hmm.
nobility.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, what had happened as time went on is the kind of chivalric um, type of like noble professions in war moved to the sky, and it was the pilots, and it was the helicopter pilots, or plane, helicopter, jet engine, or jet fighter pilots that basically took on the role of cavalry, and the grunts and the people on the ground kind of took a more dehumanized role. But even that's changing now with how modern military operations are run. It's a lot less like a like human wave attacks, and I mean even in World War II it was a lot less human wave attacks. It was mostly based around tanks, but even now it's mostly counter terrorist operations and counterinsurgencies,
Right.
Right.
like asymmetrical warfare.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And this counterterrorism and these efforts, right? I'm not talking about the mode in which they are taken now. I'm talking about the like I'm not, yeah, I'm not talking about if it's counterinsurgency or not, or if it's counterterrorism or not. I'm saying that the uh, way it's manifested, right? No matter the mode, the way it's manifested, that's what counts. And I'm basically under the impression that it's rather that the true way, the true objective now is not so much to be, the hero, which really put the soldier as the main focal point, but rather the degree to which the soldier can apply himself to technological tools, right? Yeah, technological tools. How much he can become an extension of those things, and in that sense, it is somewhat a dehumanized process, because the soldier is no longer the main focus, right? It's rather the main focus is technology, which is brought into light by the soldier because the soldier is using it. I mean, a good example, right, is the fact that if you're using a sword, you kind of have to put your whole body into it, right? Because it's entire motion, and in a sense, the sword is an extension of you. Rather, with a gun or a rifle, the only thing you have to do is like your body movement that you have to take on is a lot lower, right? You just have to pull the trigger and then stabilize with your weaker hand. And in that sense, the gun isn't an extension of the soldier. No, the soldier is an extension of the gun. It kind of brings life to the gun, and the spotlight goes on to the gun, meaning people aren't calculating how much they can, not people, sorry, the high command aren't calculating how good the soldier is. No, they are calculating how good the soldier is relative to how well they can use the gun. In that sense, it's not really the soldier that's fighting. To use Junger's words, it's not really the soldier that's fighting. It's technician, right? So yeah, I'm still of the opinion that the human side of the war isn't really present, and I don't think it's coming back. If anything, it's a lot more the case that the human is subordinated to machine, especially now with hacking endeavors, right? Um, People have become more engaged in the engaged and stuck and involved in the apparatus that they're using, right? This is basically Junger basically predicted the beginning of the military-industrial complex.
Yeah. But what about the argument about kind of planes and kind of aerial warfare? Was like pretty individualistic, you know. We talk about a lot of heroes like the Red Baron even during World War One.
Yeah, that's why I don't know if this is true because I've only read it in like one of those historical fiction novels, but the Air Force during World War One, they didn't even have an Air Force. They just had military. They just had planes. There wasn't really an Air Force. I don't think so. I don't know. The point is, they refer to these aircrafts as like, the new knights, right? It was a new way of dealing with knights, and I'll give you that, right? However, so like there is the there is that counter argument you can make there where. Yeah, like even though technology dehumanizes the soldier, it also opens up to new like technology allows people to fight on newer planes, which kind of takes them back to that heroism, right? And this might be a ridiculous take, but maybe it wasn't so much that technology dehumanized man as an absolute, rather it dehumanized man in the current mode of fighting, and it will remain. However, at the same time, it opens up to new modes of fighting until it opens up, right? And once we tap into that new domain, then the heroic can come before it is ultimately taken over by the industrialized or hyper-organization of it. So like the new domain that I'm thinking about was built around the Trump presidency, which of course is a space force. Now that you mention it, I don't know if this is a crazy take, but yeah, maybe like the space force, right, can become the new dogfights that we saw in World War One. You do have a point there, right? So it does have. So I guess technology does have that swallowing aspect, where it kind of does dehumanize the process. However, it kind of gives at the same time bursts new domain of heroism that Junger lamented about for being so absent.
Well, true, there is a sense of heroism to it, but there's no sensory feedback like there was. Like, for example, in the trench wars of Junger's, in the first trench war, he talks about about sleeping in the trenches. You actually feel the dirt. You have to deal with the water seeping into your bones and stuff. And with military, that experience can never be replicated. There's the sensory feedback, the touch, the smell, excuse my words. Yeah, with planes. Well, planes. See, back then you were still exposed. They didn't even have cockpits back then. Your head was straight up in the air back in, I think, of the early times. I don't think cockpits were even invented until what, the 70s?
No. Yeah, they were in World War II.
Yeah, but World War One, they still had open tops, if I recall correctly.
From what I know, pilots often had chains with them and like bricks that they could throw at like other planes to like ensnare them in the chains and stuff like that.
Well, they'll drop bricks.
Well, I mean, you can still have the sensory input with things like helicopters. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie what was it called? Was it
Apocalypse
Vietnam?
Now.
Apocalypse Now.
We were heroes.
No, I think it was
We Were Heroes.
Apocalypse Now.
Oh, never
Apocalypse
mind.
Now. Yeah.
Okay.
No, it is a great movie.
Well, he talks about the smell of napalm in the morning, in the very beginning of it. The smell of victory.
Okay, that is true. That is true. But again, Vietnam was also almost a throwback to guerrilla warfare. Yeah,
Well,
because
most modern warfare is guerrilla warfare.
true. But I don't know. If you expand, let's say what Kohei said about the Space Force, like the pilot, the sheer sense of like as soon as you get shot, you're dead because the whole space vacuum thing. But most likely it'll be AI. Like in the future, we won't have like robot tanks. Most likely the robots will be AI based, and it'll be like the people who do drone strikes, where they're just sitting on a computer trying to destroy the robots of another person. It's going to be completely automated soon.
Also, too, Kohei, you mentioned the long range of the World War One. If space warfare were to take off, I read somewhere that it would probably be even longer range because a laser, it doesn't need that much time to travel, right? So if space warfare were to be a thing, it would probably be at distances that would just be like uncalculable to us, and it'd probably even further separate the fighters and I guess dehumanize it in a certain sense if that were to take off.
Yeah, and sorry, my throat's bad. I mean, and to Muggy's point, against Muggy's point, sorry, there was still sensory in so against Muggy's point, there was still sensory in airplane, right? Especially with the air pressure, going against G forces. However, for Muggy's point, I do think that you like. Okay, I don't know the dynamics of space travel that well. I'm pretty sure the only sensory perception you can feel in terms of your surroundings would have to be the lack of gravity. The point is the essay that I was reading, just to give credit where credit is due. It was I believe it's a university paper from Lancaster, UK. Ernst Junger, Total Mobilization and the Work of War by Bogdan Kostia and Kostas Amredis. Anyways, there are... Yeah, can I... Sure.
So, historically, naval war was pretty similar. Even throughout colonial times, it was very long range, and but there was still a nobility to naval warfare. I mean, there still is a nobility to naval warfare, in that kind of the tactics behind it still remain. We still talk about heroes like Trafalgar. We still talk about Horatio Nelson and battles like Trafalgar as these kind of amazing tactical kind of miracles. But I feel like that doesn't dehumanize the person in the ship. I feel like the person in the ship who's fighting still has a heroic aspect to being a part of something like that. It's just less individualistic.
Well, yeah, that's. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. I'll let you finish.
For kind of air warfare in kind of the dogfight era, it was a lot more individualistic. It was a lot more person-to-person based to who is the greatest. What was the name of it if you got
Flying
more than 5? Flying ace. It's like the flying ace. Who's the greatest individual pilot? We talk about the Red Baron, and there are other pilots too like that who did pretty good.
And individuality is what I'm talking about when I say dehumanization, right? They no longer care about you as a person. They only care you about how well you fit into the mold of technology, right? So I think that dehumanization process is there in the Navy, whether or not there is nobility, right? In World War II, if you wanted to, fire weapons, you would have to go behind the gun, right? And then, I don't know what those guns are called, but like they're bigger than your the width of your body. Those anti-aircraft guns, and like you would have to like shoot them with two hands, right? Now what you do is you go to your nearest computer, and then you use your index finger, and you vertically shift your finger down so that enough weight goes onto the computer button, thereby activating the system to fire a missile, right? It's a lot different, and
overall my point was about is it's completely drastically exactly it's that's what overall
like,
my point was about is it's completely
so, like, I
drastically different.
And
give
like
Daniel like some leeway in that, like there is a possibility that like it does open up new domains, first the air, and then
and then
potentially the Space Force, but overall, right, I think the degree to which it's swallowing up and dehumanizing it overshadows the degree to which new domains are opening up. It could also be the case that we're just not good with technology to open up those domains in the first place, though.
Well, also too, the ways that people, I guess the combatants can contribute to the battle is also less showy in certain ways. Like, for example, this seems to be World War One, around the time when the sapper, combat engineer, starts to kind of become a role. And based on what Junger tells me, and based on what I know about that job, I feel like there's still a bit of individuality in how that can be applied. Like, Junger, he mentions that, in their spare time, they dug certain trenches, right? Or I think they even laid certain minefields. It seems like there was, I don't want to say creativity, but there's like a strategy to that. But of course, that's something that like the enemy doesn't see, right? And it's something kind of clandestine or something that like you kind of do secretively, right? And so maybe it's not quite like the guy on the open battlefield charging with the sword and everyone can see him and say, "Oh, he's so brave." And look at how he's contributing, right? It's more like this kind of thing that I just do on my own and contribute to the battle. And I still have agency and I'm kind of applying myself, but it's not as showy. You know what I mean?
The same could be said about tunnel rats in in the Vietnam War, who would go into Viet Cong like underground bases and liquid.
I'll go to that. I'll address that, but first I'll address Michael. So Michael, that's a good point, right? With the
Michael.
So you kind of mentioned how the flashiness of the mine laying, the mine establishing, the mine clearing, sweeping it's absent in those activities. However, I'll give you this, right? You did mention some creativity in it. So obviously, right, creativity that's something that depends from person to person, right? It's a personal trait. Therefore, there is a humanizing aspect to it, right? But then here's the thing, though. Mines were a relatively new thing, I think, right? At least it was the first time that it was used on a mass scale, right? So I think that could be one of those instances like the plane where it kind of the only reason why it wasn't like dehumanized was because it was new, right? So that's process of laying and clearing mine was new. That's why in the midst of the inhumane sweeping of the machine gun, you had individual acts of like clandestine operations, right? Oh, it's almost like the stormtroopers, right? Like special units. And then like to my point, or I continue on to my point, as soon as World War II hit, right? Yeah, okay, like those sappers were still used, especially in North Africa, right? And because it was very flat. However, that was the same war that started to apply like entire tanks that would just like hammer down on the ground before you, and then it would just like clear all the mines. So even the process of like creatively figuring out, all right, dude, how do I like go to the other side? How do I lay down the mines? How do I activate it? Or how do I get back safely? That was all gone. You just have to like press a button, boop, and then like all the mines are cleared thanks to your whatever vehicle that you have. So that's to Michael's point, right? And if you guys have any things to address that, you can tell me after I address Daniel, which is the Vietnam. So Vietnam, it's seen like as this like big outlier war in that the technology used was quote unquote primitive, right? A lot of bamboo sticks and like booby traps and all that. However, at the same time, you do see this in the counter-terrorist operations, especially against in the Middle East. So like even though like so it's not that like of an outlier, right? And so like and so you could argue, well, yeah, so as time goes on, it doesn't necessarily mean that we become more dehumanized. No. Time has nothing to do with it. It's the level of technological application that you decide to utilize. That has everything to do with it, right? So, like, the weapons that the Vietnamese used, they weren't that, like, advanced compared to, like, massive Agent Orange strikes, right? Which you have to, like, meticulously combine chemicals and deploy them. So it wasn't so much a matter of time, right? Like what time you are in, but rather the technology.
Technology.
The Vietnamese with an inferior technology and like inferior everything basically managed to take on a country that was like 100 times its size with maybe 30, 40 years more advanced technology than Vietnam and still win.
But like who won?
Well, yeah, but
with the dehumanization process, so.
I
mean, you could technically argue that in both World Wars, pound for pound, the Germans were more technologically advanced, right?
Come on.
With the exception of the nuke.
Americans were pretty advanced during World War II.
They were pretty
able to make plenty amount of relatively primitive devices. The reason why
one could argue that the Germans over-engineered everything.
You could because one of the reasons why is because they had a lack of resources, right? So they just made one good one instead of like 10 bad ones. However, that's just one example, right? So that's like the example that like you also have to consider all the other innovations that they were taking, right? Like the V1, V2, the V2 which got man to the moon, right? Werner von Braun famously said that my job is to shoot rockets up into the sky. Where they land is a matter of politics, right? So like in terms of like landing on the moon, like that was thanks to the Germans, right? And if you wanted to get crazy, right, speaking of space wars, they were trying to design a means of like harnessing the sunlight and then focusing it on their enemies from outer space. So I'm not really talking about whether technological advancement can make you win the war. I'm talking about whether technological advancement can dehumanize you. And the dehumanization process, according to the essay that I've alluded to 10 minutes ago, is that because it goes into a more bureaucratic stance, and more importantly, because technology allows armies to conquer more huge swaths, right, because of long-range weapons, thanks to technology, the small-scale micro-soldier, the unit, becomes more and more of a footnote, right? It like if you zoom out to what technology can cover, like what area on the battleground it can cover, then each individual soldier can become smarter and smarter in scale. That was my point.
Hear me out here. Maybe the issue isn't necessarily with technology itself, but the philosophy of warfare that has kind of taken over the modern psyche. I mean, obviously modern warfare has failed. Like, modern industrial armies have failed to take Afghanistan and hold it. Kind of a daunting task, but say like a Roman army would have been able to take over 10 times larger swaths of land and still have very aggressive natives living upon it and still manage to keep hold of it. You know, they managed to do so with Gaul. They managed to do so with Spain, which was very brutal, in fact. But modern industrial armies seem incapable. Well, also Alexander managed to conquer Afghanistan too. But modern industrial armies seem completely incapable of dealing with modern asymmetrical warfare. And maybe the issue isn't necessarily with the technology in and of itself, but of the bureaucratic nature of war and the fact that the modern philosophy around war is kind of built around like industrial, kind of the Industrial Revolution and the philosophy behind that. You know, like how factories would run at the time. Maybe as a result of that, the philosophy around war is behind, and maybe how we're viewing war in and of itself is just retarded, I guess. You know, maybe the dehumanization doesn't necessarily come from technology, but comes from the philosophy of, say, the educated commanders on top.
He might be correct of that, because in a lot of ways, war is just seen more as, honestly, more as busy work. Like from the lower class of people, any sense of glory or nobility or anything like that has been completely extinguished. All aesthetic ideals have been extinguished from a culture in general, but particularly with war. War is just seen 100% as a negative, bad from the general plebeian masses. But in terms of the higher ups, they just see it more as busy work. You know, like, oh, it's just maintenance. It's like making sure your match of Hearts of Irons, making sure everything, all the resources are up to 100%. You know, it's resource management.
Yeah. Well, also warfare these days doesn't really have any like spirit to it. It's just kind of like making sure that one industry has enough money to like keep going, so the economy stays running for a little bit longer. So,
yeah.
So you can print more money, and so you can indebt more people. I mean, the kind of machine of warfare is not what it used to be. I think the best example of this might sound really weird and kind of out of the ordinary, but if you look, and I was talking about this before, if you look at certain cultures, and you look at certain cultures' media, and you look at certain cultures' view of warfare, and especially warfare in kind of like a sci-fi context, you see what it can be. You know, there can be nobility, there can be an advancement in warfare. You know, warfare doesn't necessarily have to be just to like some people in a mountain that don't want to pay debt to like don't want to use some kind of currency, and you just go there and conquer it for like 10 years and then end up getting like kicked out because a democracy cannot deal with occupying a people. A democracy is just physically incapable of occupying hostile people. It's just impossible, basically.
That is true. And also, to your point, I think we're looking at this from a purely American point of view, because the only war right now that actually has any spiritual or any meaning is actually the conflicts between Israel and Palestine right now. That's purely 100% aesthetics. It's based on religion, which is the aesthetic ideals. Also,
Armenia and Azerbaijan too.
Oh yeah, true in those cases, and some conflicts in the Ukraine. But in terms of the worldscape, that's the only one where it's literally nothing to do with economics. In fact, the rules of economy state most likely that there's no economic incentive for this war between the Palestinians and the Israelis. There isn't really a more clear sense would be one of them, because they've been doing it for how many decades now? How long have they been a war for? In terms of pure economics, it would make much more sense to bury the hatchet, have them be partners, and more economic growth that way, more stability that way, less loss of life. So from a purely utilitarian standpoint, the war is impractical and makes no sense.
Yeah.
And both the left and the right try to justify the war. The left uses critical theory and Marxist axioms, and the right uses spiritual aesthetic language. And so it's that war in particular is a very interesting aspect because it's the only war that isn't solely about resources. It's something beyond just resources.
Well, it's pretty interesting that throughout the 1960s we talked about, I don't know if you ever talked to like a boomer before, but like a hippie boomer, but they would talk about like John Lennon and Imagine and how like everybody should be kind of together and in a hippie circle, singing Kumbaya. But it's pretty interesting how human nature always brings us towards these conflicts, and how human nature always seeks, especially for like higher beings, human nature always seeks for higher purpose and nobility and all of these things, and all of those things can only be brought about through war. I think that is kind of what Storm of Steel is trying to talk about when it comes to World War One. Maybe the issue is that the war lacked complete like aesthetics. Maybe it was not maybe the issue of like the technology or the nature, because throughout the book Junger talks about camaraderie. He talks about drinking with his friends right before the battle. He talks about saving his friends' lives. He talks about going into the fray with his comrades, and maybe the issue that Junger had with World War One was the aesthetics of the war. Because what was the point of World War One? It was purely a case of court intrigue turned violent, turned hot, basically. So maybe instead of Junger's, maybe we're viewing Junger's critique of technology wrong. Maybe Junger's actual critique was of that of aesthetics. Yeah, basically.
True, and also fundamentally about meaning, because he even talks about in the end, when at the end of the novel, he talks about how overall, how the metal, they give you a little metal, and he's like, it's not even made out of gold, it's made out of like painted over steel or metal. And he gets it, and he's like, I know fundamentally it doesn't mean anything, and it only means something beneath the surface of it. It means something to me, but once everything goes back to the land of milk and honey, it doesn't really matter. It only matters when you're in the moment. It only matters when you see another soldier and you see that little medal on them. He went through some shit.
But I don't know if you guys have read Patriotism by Yukio Mishima.
No, I haven't. Isn't it like a super rare book? Apparently it's like barely printed.
Yeah, I have a print copy here. It's kind of expensive to get, but the point I'm making about Patriotism by Yukio Mishima is he talks about the story is basically about an officer who commits after the military basically tells him to
Seppuku.
How do you say it? Seppuku.
Go.
So it's not seppuku, it's seppuku.
Yeah, seppuku.
Sorry.
Not
Continue.
Continue.
I think it was so Harakiri is the one where you grab the sword and you put it through your heart, and seppuku is the one where you take your...
both of them is your stomach, but there's like, okay, it's like one of those things where like all A is B but all B is A.
B but all B is A.
Oh, okay. Well, he was. The story kind of goes around this commander, and he talks about this thing. He was saying that if he were to even continue living, it would not be the same, because the ecstasy that he feels in the moment before he kills himself is the greatest feeling in the world that can't be matched by anything else. So maybe what Junger is saying when he talks about the metal being painted over is actually not really so much of oh, it's pointless, it was useless, but the emotions that he felt at the time were so powerful that nothing can come up to it, or nothing can kind of bring him to that point,
Yeah, okay, y'all are making good points, man, but where did the lack of aesthetics come from, though?
But
Uh,
he talks about it in Siegfried when he visits a little. It's near the bits when he fights the Indians, the Indian infantry, when they fight in this beautiful little mansion right near the border. And he talks about how basically how everything perfect was, how him and the boys would go swimming and lay on the grass. Finally, there's flowers. He finally feels at peace, and he even talks about how when you're in an environment like that in beauty, it doesn't really matter. It feels okay to die. How just one death doesn't matter in such a beautiful place. In such a place, in such a perfect setting, death does not matter anymore.
Okay, this might not be totally related, but I've heard that towards the end of his life, Junger started experimenting with drugs.
Not towards the end of his life, just after World War II, and we don't know how long he continued.
We don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, World War II messed him up.
All right. No. My point is, y'all making good points up with the aesthetics, right? But here's where you're wrong, in my opinion, right? As far as I currently know, and I could be wrong, so please feel free to argue about this, right? You are saying it's not the technological advancement that's responsible for the dehumanization process. No, it is Yes, it is the philosophy of war, which is related to the aesthetics and the bureaucratization, the top-down process of warfare, right? However, I would argue that the top-down process of warfare, the philosophy of warfare, and the lack of aesthetics is partly, if not wholly, due to the industrial technological advances used in warfare.
Hold up. I actually have an interesting point to come with that. Sorry to cut you off, but I didn't want this thought to flee my mind because it's actually really interesting. Chinese actually had a very similar view of warfare to what we view in what we viewed in World War I and the kind of trench warfare we viewed at the time, because the ancient Chinese state was very similar to the ancient modern state. So it was very centralized, it was very bureaucratic. So a lot of their aspect around warfare was very similar, They would basically use human swarm tactics, and they would, if you've ever seen, the meme, the battle of the Golden Panda, Admiral G and Admiral Pu, 6 million deaths or 10 million deaths. Their idea of warfare was very similar. They were a completely non-industrial society. Their society was one of pre-industrialization. In fact, they industrialized late. But they had a very similar warfare strategy to that seen in World War I, and that's seen in a lot of country-to-country warfare at the time. So that may give you the answer on technology.
Alright, so you're saying, okay, so by proving the existence of that top-down bureaucratic, lack of aesthetic philosophy of warfare, but proving the existence of that before, hyper advanced technology was put in place, would kind of go to your point that technology is not responsible.
Yeah. Well, at the same time, there was societies that broke away from that with the same technology. Japan, for example, had a very similar kind of method of warfare. Pre-Dynamo era, and after kind of the shogunate.
Well,
Daimyo?
I wouldn't know either. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
But after that way of warfare was put aside, they went back to, or they didn't go back to, but they developed a more honorific, chivalric way of warfare. That's where the Bushido code comes from, and that's where various other things come from.
I'll let you answer that. Okay, all right. Okay, so sure. So you can talk about how. So if you guys are correct, right, then you can talk about how the dynamics that, according to the authors of this essay, according to these authors, Junger complained about all these stuff, right? XYZ, and they claimed it was thanks to tech. But by proving that the dynamics existed before technology, and, people were experimenting with different modes, right, different ways of fighting, different philosophies, right, top-down, bottom-up technology, no, not technology, sorry, aesthetics, no aesthetics, you can kind of, and, with the few, aesthetics warfare that's happening today, especially if it has to do with, like, your ideals and things like that, and anything that's beyond purely material, like economics, then sure you can technically say that technology should not stand guilty. However, should we conclude that technology should not stand guilty, or should we say that technology should not be the only one that should stand guilty? Which is to say that, yes, although the aesthetics of war or lack thereof can be responsible for the dehumanization of war, and if one were to say, well, where did that aesthetics of war come from, we can argue that it did not come from technology, because that existed and disappeared before technology, right? And so can we say that technology, though not the sole guilty defendant, can we also say that it is also guilty to begin with, right? Can it be?
Hear me out here. When Japan was forced to open up through gunship diplomacy by the U.S., and the Meiji Restoration happened, and basically samurais were forced to take away their sword. They found an outlet of that samurai spirit in the Japanese Imperial Army. Like the noble spirit will always
sure
with or without.
Okay.
Okay, I was gonna say, and how did that work out for them? But I guess that's kind of irrelevant. That's kind of irrelevant because we're not talking about victory or defeat.
Okinawa, and they conquered Korea.
No. I mean, it doesn't really matter, right? If whether they won or not, because what matters is the dehumanization process of it. Okay, sure. Okay, but like, at the same time though, can't you say that the dehumanization, because you're talking about this humanization process on the macro scale. You're talking about whether the war itself was aesthetic. You're talking about how the war itself was philosophically good or not. No, let's not forget that, like, Junger was also talking about the micro scale. Right, Junger was talking about how the individual experience and how that was deferred in favor of the macro scale, long range artillery, right? So, like, when you talk about like the various conflicts we have today, which are exceptionally aesthetics, right? That's war on the big scale, right? So no matter what technology you input or you don't input, long range missiles, short range sword fights, that aesthetics can still be there or absent. Now I'm talking about the individual experience of each soldier, and I think that has to do with like technology, though.
You know what? I'm gonna back up Kohei's claim on technology being kind of the culprit here, because I think in Junger's book he, like, time and time again, emphasizes the newfound fragility of the soldier, right? Like how just like a splinter from a bomb, like a tiny like thread-like splinter can cause like major injuries, and how this was basically the first war where like you had to hide your soldiers effectively from the enemy combatants, like to the degree where you had to dig trenches underground. And so I think that has a big factor to play into it. Just the fact that like this is now like a war where you have to hide the troops. You can't like have them out open the battlefield, and you can't keep them exposed. And so protecting them is like of the utmost importance now. I think that and
well,
again,
yeah.
the fragility has a big...
Hold on, Mike. Hold on. No. Let me finish. I'll let you go. Sorry. Yeah, sorry, that's the garage. Just to clarify, I'm not talking about war as a conflict. I'm not talking about war as a big picture thing. I'm talking about the individual experiences of a soldier, no matter the war, no matter the time. And I think the degree to which that experience is dehumanized depends on the degree to which there is technology, right? You guys been talking about aesthetics, you guys been talking about top-down philosophy, you guys been talking about the bureaucratization, but that's to do with war on the macro scale. I'm talking about on the micro experiences.
Well, I mean, the fragility of the soldier and the closest to death a bad thing? And is it ahistorical either? I mean, the Romans, who didn't have penicillin, didn't have any type of decent medical technology, were very close to death as well. But their view of death was very different than our modern view of death. They viewed death as an honorable thing. You know, if you were to die an honorable death, that would be considered great. You know. Maybe how we view death in and of itself as negative is where the kind of problems lie. You know?
Yeah, so you're kind of talking about the philosophical route, and maybe aesthetics. I don't know if it has to do with aesthetics, but okay, sure, and you kind of have to but then like that also correlates with how like, okay, so when you think about deaths, right? The way you portray deaths, that was a very micro scale thing, right? It was how can one die, right? It's not they're not talking about death itself. No, they're talking about one's personal relationship to death. So it's very personal, it's very human, right? Sure. However, at the same time, can't you say that the aesthetics of death was thanks to the lack of technology, because there was no technology, because there was no automation, because there was no huge organization, the focus was on the individual soldier, because they had to carry the weight. Now that the technology has to carry the weight, death is bad. It is gonna be bad, because if you die, then who's gonna run the machines, right?
Hear me out here. When Junger was, I forgot which chapter it was, but in one of his chapters, he talks about, why don't I run away? He was like, why is it that I stay in this trench and I could be squashed at any moment? Like, my life is literally meaningless. And he says the reason why he stays, and I feel like this is the point where he develops this kind of sense around honor and the sense around an honorable death, which I feel like transcends technology. I feel like an honorable...
I'm saying it doesn't.
Dude, I'm saying it doesn't.
He says it's honor and duty. He said it was honor and duty that kept him in that trench and kept him fighting.
This is dog now that we're guerilla.
What happened to the...
Yeah, well, I mean... Okay,
Yeah, well,
so,
I mean...
Sure. But can't you, hold up. But can't you argue that that's just an, what's the word, when it doesn't belong, in the time and place, like, an anachronism? No, anachronism is, anachronism, yes, thank you, Michael. You know, you could kind of argue that with Junger, that was kind of an anachronism. Like, you can extend the same argument to the, Imperial Japanese forces of World War II, right? In fact, like, a lot of their, banzai charges were, not only was it last ditch, but like in terms of like the economics of human resources, they were very wasteful, right? And because that wasn't because at that point in the war, when banzai charges were more common, the point wasn't really to live to fight another battle. No, it was to die with honor, right? And like the fact that they deployed that when the war was losing kind of tells you that such a loyalty to honor and duty is something of the past. And Junger, yes, while it may have been the case that he was kept in place, right, and kept steady by the ideals of honor and duty, it may have been an ideal of the past, something that was alive thanks to the a lack of technology, right? And which is why he was able to, which is why he had like conservative tendencies during the Weimar era, right? Especially he wrote on pain, right, where he really really was against the tendency of the masses towards liberal comforts, and he wanted to return to a more old school kind of mentality, right? So yeah, like your point, what you're saying isn't wrong, Daniel. It's just that I don't think it's the fact. Yeah, it's alright. I don't think it's the case that that's something that belongs in the modern era. When I say belong, I'm not talking about should or shouldn't. I'm talking about if it does or doesn't.
Well, honor does play itself out in the modern era, though. Like, there are aspects of honorifics, and in warfare, there's aspects of honor in our modern society. You know, like there's still camaraderie, for example, and I mean, if you watch any of those activity videos where it's like some dude in the army is wearing a GoPro in Afghanistan, you do see that that camaraderie, which is another aspect of kind of the old honorific society. You know, camaraderie is a harkening back to the past.
I'll give you that, right?
But also, I would like to also add that as for the kind of last ditch effort, the last ditch stuff, and the honor based system that that Junger was talking about, I feel like that almost. I feel like you can't really equate those two things, because the honor and the duty he was talking about while staying in those trenches, I think it's kind of hard to say that it was something that didn't belong in its time, because it still exists now. Like, say for example, if you were a deserter and you joined the other side, I think there was a case of a soldier in Russia, and he, during the Afghan-Russian war, he joined the other side and he went back to Ukraine, and instantly all his old comrades just didn't want to talk to him because he was a deserter. And that's the thing that still exists in the modern day. Like, the sense of honor and duty of a soldier is something that's like still pretty sacred, even in like modern very technologically advanced armies, you know.
All right, sure. I'll give you that.
Sure.
Right? I guess with that in mind, right, with you saying that, my stance would be like because you still can't deny, like, if you look at it black and white, it's a bit hard to kind of like make a conclusion, right? But if you kind of like look into the gray areas, couldn't you say that yes, technology kind of did dehumanize the fighting process, especially with the impersonal killings, right? However, at the same time, there.
Even the Napoleonic era,
let me
like
finish.
back
Let
to
me
the
finish.
Napoleonic
Let me
era.
finish. Right. So, okay. So, because, well, I'll address the Napoleonic stuff later. But so we can say that technology kind of leads to the dehumanization. However, it cannot. It is impossible, or it has yet. It is impossible or inevitable, but it has yet to take out all of the honor stuff. And especially if you look at it in the very micro, like the scene, like the very stitches of the entire picture, you can still see that camaraderie and honor, right? At the same time, you know, that's that. At the same time, you know, this is suspecting. I'm making suspicions from a civilian perspective here, but I would argue that those sense of camaraderie exist more in the infantry front line rather than the back line. You know, artillery and even. Okay, no. I think the camaraderie exists no matter where you go. Although to Muggy's point, the sensory perception is different. Okay, so I'll say that no matter where you go, there is camaraderie still present. However, can we agree that some aspects of the war experience is dehumanized thanks to technology?
I'm just going to hold up on the sensory perspective thing, just to make a point on the sensory perspective thing. For a tankman, smelling the diesel and the gunpowder.
Front line.
Well, a tank is still artillery.
But it's
even in the modern day, a tank.
Yeah, but
frontline artillery.
It's frontline artillery.
I see.
It's not artillery from behind the front lines attacking the other side. It's that no. Do you know why? Do you know why tanks have wheels? So that you can go to the front lines.
Hey, hear me out here though. The back lines could still get attacked by bombers. Like in World War II, the back lines were not really safe. They would still get attacked by enemy aircraft. So I feel like the closeness to death is still there as an artilleryman.
Okay. All right.
Because the technology of aircrafts wasn't really there yet. But
Mhm.
I feel it again. This brings back to the original point. I do feel that the way that technology operates is that the noble spirit and the closeness to death will always go closer. It's just nature, like the way that technology operates will always bring people closer and closer to death. So in World War I, the artillerymen may or may not, I don't know, I wasn't there, but they may or may not have been closer to death than the front linesmen. They probably weren't. But in World War II, I feel like the artilleries were just maybe a little bit less, but they were still close to death.
All right, yeah.
But the nature of war, I feel like, makes it so that as technology operates, maybe there is a slight advantage to the people in the back line, but eventually the technology will operate so that everybody is in the same boat. I feel like how technology works is it always kind of basically you want to kill the other person, right? You don't want to keep this entire back line exposed.
And that's something that the essay I talked about kind of hinted at, or not hinted at, explicitly stated, where technology allows the one side or any side to just kind of enlarge the playing field, right? Which is why in World War II you can argue that there was no front line. Everywhere was a front line, right? Okay, so but I don't know, because let me just brainstorm here, right, and say that maybe I have the right conclusion but not the right reasoning, right? And the reasoning that I had prior was the proximity to death, right? Maybe that ain't it, right? Especially because technology has an engulfing factor to it. But I was also so. But what about the micro scale of the infantryman? Right, especially as you said, right, in this day and age with counterterrorism, counterinsurgency, guerrilla strikes, right, they're applying something that was invented by the Germans in World War I, which Junger was part of, right? The shock troops, right? Small units special forces type stuff, right? Not like the special forces branch, but like exceptional units within the army, right? And to kind of do those small strikes and stuff. You do have that microness to it, right? Rather than that kind of you do work as a team, but the team is small, right? It is connected to the main military apparatus, but you still have to kind of depend on yourself, and you are in the enemy side depending on the small group of you. Whereas artillery is often there's no lone artillery, right? It's usually in groups of guns, and so there is that kind of organization aspect to it, and that organization aspect to it is thanks to technology, though partly thanks to.
and support too is a lot different than it used to be. For example, now they could just use stealth bombers and like aerial strikes, and most artillery these days are like tanks because artillery has to be incredibly mobile when dealing with asymmetric warfare. You know, you can't really have like an army of train guns shooting like nonstop like on a city. It would be like a PR nightmare for any country. I mean, imagine what the news would say if like Kabul was completely leveled like the Russians did to Grozny in the Chechen War.
Yeah, and also that's another aspect is with the United Nations, the united almost globalism of the world right now. PR also plays a lot more into it, very uncomfortably so.
Well, that's because of democracy. I mean, again, that brings me back to the philosophy of war. The issue is not necessarily with the aspect of technology in and of itself. I mean, if technology were to be given free reign, I have no doubt that we would be. This might sound a little bit weird, but we might be like fighting in Gundams in space right now. I mean, who knows, man? I mean, of course, nukes are definitely a part of it, but I do feel that in the modern day, nukes are becoming more and more obsolete. I feel like biological warfare and the ability for somebody to like deploy a disease that's maybe genetically modified to affect like a certain group of people or a certain demographic of people within a country would be way more effective than a nuclear weapon. Like, if I were to create a disease and I were to unleash it onto a country, I would not have to deal with any of the consequences of, say, like nuclear fallout or like society kind of not collapsing, but like infrastructure going down. I would just have like a depopulated place which I could just go and invade, you know. So I do feel like in the modern day things are changing. Are they changing for the better in terms of warfare? I don't know. But there is cases such as in the 90s in Sierra Leone where there is a aspect of heroic kind of individualism, you know. You can kind of look at I don't know if you guys know about the Congo mercenaries in the 1970s too. Any of you guys know about the Congo mercenaries in the 1970s?
No.
Well, it was an incredibly individualistic. It was almost like harkening back to the pirate and like bandit era of like the 1700s. You know, kind of these like roughhousers and these what's the word called? Losers of society that basically went and they get paid. They get handed a gun and they have to take over like a town basically. There's videos on it on the internet, but this kind of era of like mercenaries and this era of people fighting in like, for example, what happened in Sierra Leone with what was his name again? Ellis. He basically stopped an entire army of insurgents from invading the capital city of Sierra Leone with only like a old like Soviet gunship, you know, like. It has, in my opinion, returned the era of individualism in warfare, and the era of honor within warfare. I feel like has returned. The only issue in the modern era is with kind of the kind of PR aspect within war, and you know it's a good thing. It's a good thing in certain aspects, you know, that there is a PR aspect in certain war because you don't have what happened in World War I, where a bunch of basically idiots who didn't know anything about warfare and were just there because of cronyism, nepotism, were running basically like killing fields in like in the Psalms. But at the same time, it does stop technological advancement in a way.
I'll let Michael speak because he's been unmuted, so sometimes trying to speak, and like for the record, we do not have a everyone gets to speak equally rule here. Whoever it is up for grabs. Like, so like have no shame in talking. I would much rather you have that so that we're not policing ourselves. However, after some time, if someone wants to speak, I will hand the mic over. Yeah.
You want to speak, Michael?
I guess I do have one thing to add. I wonder how much the the lack of visibility had to do with this dehumanization you're talking about. Because with the advent of trench warfare, right? It's very hard to gauge, where the enemy is, how much of them there are, what they're doing. Often, like even intercepting transmissions, right? You often don't know what they're talking about because it's all coded and stuff like that. And so, maybe not knowing what the enemy is doing at the extent of them, and also not really knowing where your allies are as well, right? Like these trenches, they run very long, but it's hard to understand, what has been taken exactly. I wonder if that maybe often leads to like a lack of security or a lack of confidence, and maybe that doesn't really encourage that individuality and that honor to manifest. Like it's better to kind of like play it safe, hedge your bets in certain ways. I don't know.
Well, I guess I mean, that's an interesting idea. But the whole hedging yeah, I guess you're right. It is about the whole safety and hedging your bets. It's always playing it safe. And again, it comes down to there is no more grand narratives. Again, it's all about basically resource management. I do agree with certain aspects, like what he mentioned with the Congo. With certain isolated incidents, yes, there's great sense of individuality. Maybe I'm saying over behind the generals. I'm talking about the leaders, the people who have put it on paper to enact the war. The soldiers fighting it, they can still have an excellent amount of like individuality, glory, and purpose, and a real sense of deeper meaning. But I'm talking about the people behind the paper. When was the last time we actually had a non-neocon? I'm talking, well, of course, from an American perspective. We had a very, very long time since we've had a genuine, unironic, very masculine warrior president who's actually been in a war, and an actual legit war. So, same goes for most leaders, most presidents in the world right now. The only one who's actually seen any rough combat, I think, in the Western world, or pseudo-West, I think, is Xi Jinping of China and Vladimir Putin. I can't think of any other in the Western world, or the Western Hemisphere of thought, rather.
I mean, I wouldn't consider them Western, but like to Europe. Yeah, I know.
It's like
I wouldn't consider them Western, but like whatever. Okay, so like to your point on like heroism on the micro scale, don't you think that's not that's
actually? Sorry, I didn't want to cut you off there, but I think the South Korean president fought.
And then the South Korean president, yes. But notice in Europe or in the Western world, I can't think of other than if you count Russia as Europe, Putin. In the Eastern Bloc. In the Western Bloc, none of our leaders are veterans, or at least not in veterans in the sense of combat, or if they are, they're neocons.
That's true. That is very true.
Yeah. Did Bolsonaro fight in a war? I know he was a captain.
He was a captain.
No.
Nope.
It's like the 1800s or something like that. I don't even think they had too many insurgencies either.
Bolsonaro.
Yeah, I don't think that Brazil fought in a war in like a long time. So I don't think Jair Bolsonaro had a chance to fight in a war, to be honest.
Well, there's the Chile. There's of course, there's the Chile insurrection. There's a lot of the communist thing going on in South America.
Okay.
I guess they count as West.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So to your point on the the heroism still being present. Look, man, I hate to like beat a dead horse here, but I am gonna beat a dead horse until you understand that I'm beating a dead horse, man. You talk about all these like cases of like one dude defending one place from a bunch of other dudes, etc., etc. Or but then like you have to remember, these are instances where technology wasn't so much the at the disposal. You know what I mean? So like especially with the I think Congo incident. Now forgive me, I don't know the context, so like I might make some conjectures that are incorrect. However, you did mention that he was using a very old Soviet gunboat, right? So he does not have a lot of technological apparatus at his disposal. Okay. So like it's okay. So like he doesn't have a lot. If it was Afghan era, then that means the boat was built before the Afghan era, meaning 60s or 70s latest, right? So like you still have that like that boat is still old school then, right? It's not computer driven, right? So like it's like when technology is not at your disposal, the heroism comes out. So like you're right in that it is making a comeback. Maybe the heroism is making a comeback. That's only because there are situations when asymmetrical warfare is the norm, in which we can no longer rely on technology, right? So to say that, so this is one of those instances where time is not parallel to technology, right? It's not that because we are advancing in time, we are losing heroism. No, it's because we are advancing technology, we are losing heroism, right? If tomorrow we go Amperim, then tomorrow the technology heroism is back at the forefront. A great example is not in the realm of warfare, but in the realm of commercial pilots, right? A commercial commercial airplane is run by the computers. However, we still have a pilot in the cockpit, right? And no, let me finish here. And the heroism that you hear about, like Sully, I think, right? Like they did a movie of him starring crap. What was this guy like? Yeah, Tom Hanks, right? Like the reason why he was considered a hero was because he was able to put his human application when technology failed. It was in the absence of technology that the human side came, right? Otherwise, the pilot is a dehumanized clog in the machine, an extension of the machine. It's when the machine fails that the human has to, rise up to the plate and swing the bat. So, like, to your point, like, I do think that it's not the case that, technology is, technology still is dehumanizing the, process of warfare. However, however, like all the points that you make about Congo, about all of these places, are like from what the information that you've given to me, it was cases where they made a step back in technology, right? And just while go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
The Congo, there wasn't really a step back in technology. They were using like FALs, and they were using like semi-automatic firearms, which were common at the time, 1970s. That was like avant-garde technology. As for the Soviet gunship, that entire thing took place in the 90s, and he did fight with the Americans in Afghanistan in the 2000s. So he did fight during the time of drones in Afghanistan too, and I think even in the 2000s.
Were the drones present in the place that he was fighting? Not in the time he was fighting, in the place he was fighting.
Yeah, he fought in Afghanistan. They were using drones in Afghanistan.
But the case that you brought up was not Afghanistan, though. It was Sierra Leone.
Well, he fought in Sierra Leone, and he fought in Afghanistan.
Yes.
So fought in,
Yes.
He fought in a couple different.
And your example of heroism was from Sierra Leone. Were there drones present in Sierra Leone? There you go.
In Sierra Leone, no.
The lack of tech.
But I can make the same example in Afghanistan, where he said the closest I ever felt to death was in Afghanistan because they were used to dealing with Soviet gunships and they're used to dealing with drones. That could be the same aspect of heroism. It's not cut and dry. Here's the heroism. And here's his best moment, but here's his worst moment. It's still the same. He still is close to death, and he still has a great amount of like individual agency when fighting.
Okay, all right. Then I'll have to concede then, right? Then maybe it could be the case that like, okay, all right.
Well, no, I think it's a mindset thing. He still has that guerrilla. It's guerrilla warfare that keep that mindset. It's when you're in a scenario that is not very organized. It's very
richness is a mindset.
Yes. Well, it's more. Go ahead.
Hear me out here about the drones. You remember how I said that maybe in World War I the what's it called? The people in the back lines, the people
the artillery.
The artillery.
the artillery, maybe we're safe. But in World War II, there was no front lines. Everybody was in danger. Everybody was as close to death as the next person. I feel like the same could be probably said about the drones.
Yes. Okay, so with that input, that actually proves to be the case that technology was responsible for adding that kind of like life and death situation, which kind of adds to the heroism. So in a way, contrary to what I've been saying, in this case, technology is responsible for the emergence of heroism in a new domain, which is what we've been talking about with the advent of the dogfights, right? Okay. Sure.
But hear me out here too. Just say theoretically, hypothetically here, Chinese firm were to develop a jammer that manages to work to the point where it's able to stop all signal going into a drone to any of these areas. It would completely destroy drone warfare. It wouldn't even be that hard to destroy like the entirety of the drone warfare apparatus and the entirety of the technological apparatus too. I mean, there are cases of certain bombs that could explode at an atmospheric level that could destroy every computer that we're using right now. We would have to go all the way back to like tube technology, basically.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. Yeah. Okay. So that's a good point. I'll just make a quick circle back to your argument on the Napoleonic Wars, if you still care. Yeah. So like you're saying, oh, but like they were using like what were you like? Oh, like
Group, they were using very similar tactics to what they were using. Well, not similar tactics, but they were using
yes,
guns and
okay, yes.
They were using these structures that were very not individualistic and very much like in squares, basically.
You have to remember though that the technology of those long-range weapons is basically just like artillery without the gunpowder. No, it is basically artillery with the gunpowder. Like, there were cannons, bro. Yeah, there were cannons. Like, so, like, you like, it was still technological, right? So, like, no. And then, so, like, you have to remember that, like, technology isn't just machines, right? It's anything innovations, right? I think the reason why, okay, so you're saying that despite the similarities in technological advances in the artillery,
nobody sees the Napoleonic Wars as a mistake, you know? Nobody sees it as a pointless war.
Okay.
Okay. We saw the Napoleonic Wars historically in, like, historical literature as a pointless war.
So, like, the aesthetics is still present, and furthermore, there is the, what you mentioned is the, formation of still, like, that group fighting, right? That, large groups, right? So you're saying, well, how can they kind of coincide with each other? Okay, so like, I'll answer the second one first because that's easier to answer, right? My theory is that, well, artillery can take out big swaths, but it's very slow, relatively, to machine guns, right? It was the advent of machine guns that kind of made that kind of atomized the soldier experience so that it's not a group experience, right? So and so, okay, in that sense, like, technology again kind of humanized the experience, right? Because because the machine gun can, kill indiscriminately, you kind of have to like spread out and kind of like form your own units, right? Which is something that the Germans did in World War II. They had like very innovative soldier strategies that had like very atomized units where each unit is individualistic. However, they somehow work together by firing and moving simultaneously. And this was something that, though practiced in by their enemies, was not official. Now, so like it was technology that, counter to my original point, that made them more of a humane experience, because you kind of have to like you don't have the dependency of the large group, right? Okay, so that was on the question of, well, how can the large groups and technology coincide? And now on the
saying that the kind of advent of machine guns caused the kind of group structure to fall apart, is what you're saying?
Yeah.
Machine guns kill large groups, so obviously you wouldn't want to make small groups that are separated.
But repeating guns were used all the way back in the American Civil War, yet the American Civil War at the same time is also not seen as some kind of horrific, pointless event, you know? Same as World War One. In fact, it had very similar strategies too, but...
Yeah, that's true. I mean, there is the point that machine guns back then, the Gatling gun, did jam from time to time, but that was the same problem that World War One had, not only with jamming, but with overheating. So that would kind of go to your point that it had more to do with aesthetics, and said aesthetics is irrelevant to technology.
On top of that, I made a point earlier about the philosophy of war, right? So,
with aesthetics.
How war was viewed at the time of World War One, and I touched upon this earlier, but it bears repeating. How technology, how warfare was viewed was very much how like industrial factories were viewed. You know, like soldiers would clock in and clock out at a certain time, and there would be like an assembly line. It would be exactly like how a factory would operate, say in London, or in France, or in Berlin. During that time, and much of the generals were factory owners. They were nobility who owned factories, and so I feel like this early industrialization influenced the nature of kind of thought around warfare during World War One, and it was completely done away with at World War Two, because upon World War Two, strategy changed completely. People were given different roles in battle. It became more like a well choreographed play instead of just like a fray, unless you were the Soviet Union, which it was very much like World War One tactics.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm starting to. Yeah. So like. Okay. So I have to start giving grounds to you then, right? Because we see cases of like that strategy, the philosophy of warfare depend being this way over there and that way over here, regardless of the technological advances, right? So okay, so there is that, right? So I would have to agree with you on that. At the very least, can we argue that that philosophy of war is incentivized through technological advances, though?
Maybe the misuse of it. Maybe the misuse of war and the misuse of the technology. Because technology is a tool at the end of the day. Technology doesn't have a thought one way or the other, you know? It's just the advancement of technology is simply a tool, you know? It's like bronze being introduced to Egypt, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I feel like maybe the misuse or a bad philosophy behind technology, but I feel like way technology operates is it is faster than the philosophical thought of the human mind, you know. So I would kind of agree with you. I would kind of concede to your point, but at the same time, I feel like maybe instead of the technology in and of itself, it's the thought behind it, which I guess it is. Organization and how things operate is a technology in and of itself. So yeah, I guess I would concede to your point. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Okay.
Wow.
Cool.